We have an awesome speaker that we'd like to present to you next. His name is Tom Clearwater, and I met Tom last year, did an interview with him. He's new on the speaking circuit, and yet he has some of the most fascinating ideas to share with you. And he's talking about a concept of scalar energy, scalar technology, and the scalar architecture, actually, of the human being. And I find this very, very fascinating and very pertinent to what we're talking about today. So without further ado, let's give him a warm round of applause. Tom Clearwater.
Hi. Test. This microphone is loud enough for everybody? It's good. So I am, as David said, kind of new to the speaking circuit. I haven't been, let's say, in the public eye very much. And I don't really have a presence by way of some written work or anything like that. I have spent most of my life attempting to understand just the realities that I experienced. And that could be anything from emotional realities in relationships, thinking realities that I can observe inside myself, scientific realities. I'm a longtime student of all sorts of science, whether it's Newtonian science, quantum science, Tesla science, a little bit of relativity thrown in there. And basically, in the last, let's say, 10 years or so, I have been intensively investigating matters that have concerned me personally in all of those realms. So you can say, for instance, that I'm a bit of a generalist in that sense, that I have, in my kind of long-time study of these matters, essentially surveyed quite a large number of fields. And in that survey, over the course of time, eventually certain patterning started arising within my own understanding. And it is those patterns that became the driver of what I eventually came to understood as this concept of scalar humanity, taking a term that is somewhat related to the field of Tesla science, that the scalar component of, let's say, a wavelength is that part of it which is magnitudinal, a kind of pressure, and I'll explain that in my talk to some degree. But in terms of larger background, what I bring to bear is my own intense efforts to make sense of this thing we call our life, the universe, perception, experience, etc. So without any more, let me begin here. Welcome to everybody, and welcome to everybody who is watching on the internet and who will be watching later. I have just over an hour now to convey something to you, and something that I hope you can take home with you. The understanding I want to convey is, for its part, rather subtle. So I'll be squeezing a fair amount of fairly dense material into this presentation. And that will sustain probably several listenings if you're up for it through recorded media or something. And for anyone who is so inclined, I'm sure you'll be able to take something from that on each successive listening. So for this presentation, I won't repeat what's available on the internet. I've given several interviews and have, to some degree, expanded on a variety of subject matters that I will be kind of skipping through on this presentation. In this presentation, I wish to jump into the esoteric and the very general, and with the intention of connecting this perspective that I call scalar humanity into broader contexts that I consider relevant for life on this planet, and even so far to suggest a cosmological context that I will draw for your interest. So let me begin by giving you the most general definition of what I mean by scalar. If we step back, and by back I mean way back, that if we were talking, let's say, in photographic terms, you would be putting a super wide angle lens on your camera. And by super wide angle, I mean, let's skip the 18mm lens in your kit. Forget the 14mm lens, it's not wide enough. Here we are going down to 0mm, where we will there perceive in our viewfinder the everything. And by everything, I mean to perceive not only within the everything, so for example, everything you can see as these particular contents, the rising. I also want to perceive as the everything, so nothing is left out. And there I want to ask the question, is there anything peculiar or anything at all characteristic or anything that can be perceived, noticed, or understood about what we call the everything? Any character whatsoever? My answer to this question is that there is something that can be so perceived, such that when I jump into this frame, this 0mm frame of everything I am and everything that is, this combined absolute everythingness, there is for me vibrating as that place something that I call a primal duality. So the subject of the lecture tonight is duality and polarity. We will begin with that, and we will move into an understanding then of what it means to be scalar, because scalar is based on polarity. Duality, for its part, can mean many things, and depending on the person and the context. So let me give you my understanding by reference to a symbol. If we take the everything, and if we symbolize it in its allness, I give to it the symbol of a circle. Like this. The man in the image is drawing a Zen circle of completion, which in completed form looks like this. This is what is called an enza. In the lore of Zen Buddhism, the enza is the everything. It is all that can be perceived in its wholeness. And Marty did a good job of speaking about circularity and how it is inherent in the actual structure of the very foundation of what anything is, or even can be conceived to be. And in its simplest terms, the enza is just a circle. In this circle, and again, not only in the circle, but also as it, and here I want to just emphasize subtly again that you are going to see me draw something in this circle, but I want you to perceive that the circle is itself that which is inside the circle also. What I am going to draw inside this circle is something like an S like this. Circle and line, and I will call this a line, are opposites. And as Marty said in his presentation on pi, when you relate circle to line, you get the infinity of infinities, which is pi. And adding circle and line together, we of course get this. Now, most of you, I suppose, have seen this particular symbol. It's the Tao, which, according to some, is the very image of reality itself. Somehow this little circle, image of reality itself. For me, this symbol is the symbol of reality itself. That is the symbol of everything I am and the symbol of everything that is, these two being one. And in shorthand terms, this is what I call duality. Okay, nothing too special so far, just some religious and conceptual familiarity. Here I want to take a dive into subtlety. So take a big breath. We are going to be diving deep, and we'll return to the surface a little closer to the end of my presentation, perhaps a little dizzy. So let's begin. If you take this, if you take the original circle, and now with your mind's eye, draw inside that circle this S line, so that you are drawing the yin-yang opposites within that circle. In drawing that line, what can occur to you, and what will occur to you if you think about it, is that by drawing a single line, you draw both yin and yang simultaneously. So repeat the exercise if you need. But each time you will see that every time you draw that single line of S in this circle, which represents the wholeness, you draw two, which is to say you draw duality itself simultaneously. And not only simultaneously, necessarily. So opposites, we can therefore say, co-appear. They always appear simultaneously, instantaneously, and always of necessity as both together, and never just singly as one. So one never appears without the other. And in perceiving this co-appearance, this magical, instantaneous, timeless co-appearance, something that Einstein certainly wouldn't understand, we arrive at a starting point, I maintain, for beginning to understand who and what we are, and how and what anything is. That starting point goes by the name oppositeness, or opposition, or two-ness, or duality, or we can simply call it polarity. So in understanding this co-appearance of that which can never be separated, which is that which can never be understood separately, and which can in any event never be perceived in any separative fashion whatsoever, in understanding the necessity and simultaneity of what polarity is, of what duality is, of what I am calling the base foundation of existence and reality itself, in both its manifest and unmanifest forms, the entirety, the foundation of the entirety, there we reach and hit the bottom of the rabbit hole. So this is duality in my world. And again, as I am describing it, it is not merely the duality of anything found inside the circle, such as, let's say, within our common experience, electron and proton, electricity and magnetism, light and gravity, North Pole, South Pole, good, evil, and so on down through the infinite polarities that make up the manifest world. No, I am not talking only about that. In addition to talking about what is inside the circle, which can be called its content, I am talking, like I said, about the circle itself, which is the frame of the content, or what might be called the unmanifest, as the necessary second pole to what is manifest. I am speaking about these two as a single reality together. Somewhat later in my talk, I will suggest that Tesla, the famous experimental scientist of the early 1900s, stumbled onto this deep truth that frame and content are unified in the duality they are. And it was this understanding, in a functional sense, though he may not have ever put it in so many words, that popped him out of a content only, which is a closed system understanding, and took him into a completely different universe entirely. For now, I want merely to emphasize that nothing is excluded from the description I am drawing. as a description of this dualized frame content universe. So with that as a foundational starting point, let's begin to fill out this understanding of polarity, just to gain a small sense of kind of how it permeates everything that can be perceived and understood and experienced. Let's ask, what might be seen as comprising these two camps of yin and yang? Let's look first at yin. In the Chinese designation, and this is a Chinese symbol, yin is black. And in this camp of black, I see the unmanifest, which can be called the great absolute, or unity with a capital U, or the infinite, which is infinite potential. The great, unmanifest, infinite, invisible reality, the universal and the general, and so on and so on. Contrasting yin is yang, which is white. In white, I see the very opposites of everything I just named. So I see manifestation, I see relativity and relation, diversity, the finite, that which is actual and visible and particular and specialized, and likewise so on, down the complementary opposites of the camp called yin. And so here we have the beginning of a list of fundamental polarities. I set them out for you to see, with a few added from my own experience. And this is just a small sampling of things that kind of hover at that foundational level. So you can begin to see a pattern here. Basically, if you look at the terms on the left-hand side, what you will find is that those terms describe each other. So that, for instance, if you take, let's say, the number 1 up there, look at the word beneath 1, it's infinite. There is only one infinity. By definition, there can be. There cannot be two infinities. There is only one potential. There is only one universal and one general. And on the other side, where you see the number 2, you can see the word above it is diversity and finite. So in the realm of that which is diverse and finite and actual and visible and particular and special and in space, it's a part of partness, viewing from an outside perspective. All of that is the realm of the many, which can be symbolized by that number 2. So we see a broad division of camps here, where those words basically define two realities that are, in that sense, kind of self-enclosed. Look at the last two opposites there. That's what I find that very interesting. These could be called, in the Christian tradition, God and Jesus. But let's revert back to the more generic version, which is God-human, which we can otherwise call unmanifest manifest, or universal particular. Does this image look familiar to you? This is Michelangelo's famous piece painted on the Sistine Chapel. It's called The Creation of Adam. If we jump back into the general terminology of polarity as I was describing it, we can say that this is not just the creation of a particular, let's say, human being called Adam. This is the creation of particularity itself. So that anything particular, yes, is going to take on the character of some form of being or another. It's going to be an Adam or a Susie or whatever. It's going to be a dog. It's going to be a microphone. It's going to be particular, but in its particularity, it is absolutely universal as particularity. So if we view this then as the creation of particularity itself, that gets us back into somewhat more of a general frame to understand, okay, what might be happening here. You can see, in a sense, that this is, can, in a certain manner of speaking, be called the Western version of the Chinese yin-yang, of the Tao. And this is an awesome pair of pants I found on yism.com, which I think I'll buy for my partner who's sitting in the front row here. A gift from the philosopher, with a matching shirt, of course. Okay, let's continue with another subtlety. When you realize that opposites co-appear and create each other, that yin and yang, or God and human, as it were, draw each other as they draw themselves, what the reality of this two-ness implies is that there exists a single somethingness that is this two-ness, which as that singleness isn't two-ness at all, but is merely that singleness vibrated as such. This singleness is the absolute unity of opposites, and in fact, is you. So when referring to this unity in the context of polarity, when I say a single line draws both yin and yang, I am implying that yin and yang are identical. Because in their difference, in the very distinctiveness that makes them what they are as other than the other, they trace each other. And in that tracing are identical. Let me give you an illustration through an analogy here of what I mean by the identity of those opposites. If you take, let's say you take a large piece of metal, and it's just a flat piece of metal, and we can turn it this way so that one side is here and the other side is here. If I take something and strike that piece of metal, what you're going to see, if you had the visible means to be able to see this, you will see an outer-going wave as the starting point of a wave that would vibrate outside. From this side of the circle, it comes toward you. Sorry, from this side of the piece of metal, it goes away from you. Any of you familiar with how a speaker works? That is essentially what a speaker is. Now, what you do with a speaker is you put a box on one side of this waveform that is creating this opposite waveform, so that this opposite waveform doesn't come around to the front of the speaker and cancel the waveform going this way. And so you need to put a box on it because the two waves are identically opposite, going in different directions. Now that's an analogy in the realm of what I am calling the visible. What I am suggesting in my understanding here is that the invisible and the visible are opposite versions of each other, which is what I mean to say frame and content. Content being something you can see, frame being that which is the basis of seeing itself. And so like this analogy, you have opposition whereby the wave on one side is identical to the wave on the other, just flipped inside out. Now, the identity of opposites isn't the whole story. And it's obvious from our experience that when we look around, we see nothing, in fact, in our experience that ever repeats. And here I am talking about a kind of opposition where in the identity of that which is opposite, you could see a symmetry and a repetition as the very basis of it. No, there's something else going on. Besides being identical, opposites retain their absolute distinction as being completely unlike what they oppose. So not only are opposites absolutely identical, they are simultaneously with that identity absolutely different. This absolute difference in identity is what I call a negative relation. Every opposite is accordingly but an inside-out version of what it is not. And in its inside-outness, it is both absolutely identical and absolutely different. So if you were to ask, for instance, what is absolutely different from manifestation itself? Well, it's unmanifestation. Absolutely different. And yet those two being opposites, i.e. being essentially inside-out versions of each other, they're absolutely identical simultaneously. So this negative identity of opposites is actually implied by everything I said earlier. But referring again to the yin-yang, you can see that in drawing the outlines of yin, I draw the outlines of yang as the negative of yin, which is to say that yin is what yang is not, and vice versa. Polarity, accordingly, or duality itself, is a structure of negativity. Many people speak of negativity as if it's something or some content or some behavior identifiable as a separate, perhaps controllable somethingness in the world. Fair enough, I can understand this view to some extent, but here I am looking again from the vantage point of the frame also. And from that vantage point, I am seeing that every distinction is a distinction of negativity. That to draw a distinction or to be distinct as such is a negative act. So negativity is accordingly intrinsic to anything that is and can be named to be, and is not something that can be eliminated by some form of so-called good behavior. The idea of good behavior, in fact, contains a kind of hidden negative attitude toward negativity. So is an unclear tangle and a self-contradiction, essentially, that obscures the vital role of negativity as the essence of that which is different. And not only different, but as different, the same. Let me give a few examples of what I mean. So if we look, let's say, to cellular differentiation as an example, what we see in the process of cell division, so-called, is that in the dividing cell, the DNA strand within that cell unzippers into two parallel strands. Now, DNA, as perhaps we all know, is a sequencing of base pairs, and there are only 4 base pairs, and there is only 1 base pair for each of those base pairs. So the pairs are polarities. And so these two unzipped strands must be and are absolute opposites of each other. They are as yin is to yang. And only in this polarized opposition can cellular division, which is the basis of all cellular life at least, take place in any meaningful way. Let's take another example, this time from your social life. When you say about another person, I am not like that person or behavior, the difference being named is an opposition. It is an I'm not that, or it's an I'm not that way. It's essentially a not. I am not, however. So it is an opposition and a polarization, and it is accordingly, being so, it is accordingly only partially true that you and that person are unlike in the named quality. In fact, you are identical with that person in the named quality. which is why social differentiation can be such a tangle, because if you want to get free, well, you can only get so free because getting free is the act of being identical with what you're trying to get free from. You could consider differentiation in the conceptual realm. This is something that I have gone into very deeply. Just as a a part of my own self-learning process was to dive very deeply into the realm of conceptualization, to begin to understand in this extremely non-tangible world how these things that transmit through our mind and through our mental world as words and sentences forming into concepts, how that all works. And what I came to understand is that as it exists in not only the physical world, let's say with cellular differentiation, and as it exists in the social world in terms of social differentiation, person to person, group to group, nation to nation, etc., I found that the entire conceptual structure and even language itself is based on polarity. So for instance, any given word defines what that word is by essentially excluding everything it is not. And that exclusion takes place as a matter of necessary implication for what a word is. So too a concept. Any concept defines what it is by excluding what it is not, as the very act of what definition could possibly be. So, in any nameable differentiation through language or concept, the difference thus named is not that other absolutely. It's another example of being a not, of negativity. Yet given the yin-yang simultaneity of difference, every this is what it is because that is what it is as that. Just like yin is what it is because yang is what it is as yang, and could not be otherwise. There is a beautiful statement by Niels Bohr, the quantum physicist of the early 1900s, who is one of my favorite authors, summarizing the entirety of what negative relation implies. That entirety is the absolute unity of all differences, and appears in his statement, each one is as all the others are. Or we could take the equally beautiful quotation of Rabbi Menachem Mendel, where he said, "If I am I because you are you, and you are you because I am I, then I am not I, and you are not you." So we see then that negative relation, being the very character of differentiation itself, is in reality the language of the unity of all differences. Negative relation is opposition, and opposition is polarity. The language of polarity is therefore the language of absolute unity of reality itself. Difference, we can say confidently, is unity. Notice the seeming contradiction in that statement, or what some call a paradox. There is an oppositeness or a contra-saying at the heart of polarity that, once it is allowed to be as such, without working against it, without collapsing either of the poles into the other, let's say like Einstein wanting a grand unified wave theory, not a particle theory, just waves, right? That's polarity collapse. Without collapsing polarity, the very power is in the tension created by that contra-saying. So for instance, when we, let's say, talk about electronics and electricity, Many of you have probably heard the phrase a high tension line, those large lines that, let's say, come in and out of Toronto carrying very high voltage. That voltage is called tension. The tension is a tension of polarity. So the effective factor, let's say in electricity itself, is the polarized tension, which is a form of contrasting because you have the negative so-called voltage running through the wire, the positive ground, or vice versa, depending on your orientation. Okay, let's take what I have said so far and start pointing it toward a little bit more towards something real. I have said that all difference and all differentiation is but the play of unity using the negating process of distinction. I have also said that everything is of this character of being two as such, which is why we call this reality we experience duality. And because duality is negative relation, and negative relation is unity, there is no duality in the sense of anything just being separate on its own. For every separation is unity in this infinitely fractaling, polarized hall of mirrors we call reality. So here let me return to what I said at the outset, which is that if you take an original somethingness, let's say the piece of metal in that analogy that I drew, but it's not a piece of metal. It's an original somethingness. And if you vibrate it in such a way that that somethingness becomes and appears as what we see all around us here, and what we don't see, i.e. what we feel. If we vibrate that somethingness such that, poof, we have this, and that, and everything, we will have vibrated, in my opinion, the original vibration of reality itself. Having vibrated the original vibration of reality itself, you will then begin to know yourself as creator. That's some heavy implication. So you're perhaps beginning to understand the import of what I am describing by this very general context I am drawing. Within this context, allow me now to pose the question, what is scalar humanity? Scalar humanity, in the way I intend that phrase, is the architecture of duality written into and as the human constitution. In interviews you can find on the internet, I have described this human constitution by reference to the electronic workings and structure of a Tesla coil. This analogy is awesome, and there's the human being, believe it or not. And it holds up the more I look at it, but I'm not going to go into it today because I don't have enough time today to go into the required electronics terminology and concepts for those who don't have an electronics background. So let me just simply describe what I see as the human constitution. This constitution is built as a construction of opposites. In the first instance, we have the closed system of the circulatory pulsing heart. The heart, as we know, is mostly neuronal, which should tell us something. So it's a kind of signaling and informational intelligence. And the energy it creates is second to no system in the body. And as a pulsing, closed circuit, the heart beats the essential stamp of our individuality and our uniqueness and our difference. So let's say in this, for those who want to follow along with the Tesla coil analogy, this primary here would be the heart circulatory system. And you can see it's a circle. It's essentially a closed circuit. And with closed circuit, you get closed system. and all of the ramifications of what closed system means. Fundamentally, most of our sciences these days are closed system conceptualizations without any reference to open system. So the closed system of the heart, this primary here, interfaces with the open system of the twofold structure of brain and gut. It appears to me that not many people understand that in utero, a mass of neurons grows and then divides, one half of which grows up and becomes the brain, and the other half of which grows downward to become the gut. The gut is neuronal. These two, which I find analogous to in the Tesla coil, the brain being the torus or the capacitor on top, the gut being the tubular inductor on the bottom. These two are interfaced within the human body by a vast array of nerve connections and form what can be seen as an open system line, which is, of course, opposite the closed system circularity of the heart. So here again, as what I consider the foundational kind of core structure of the human being, we have this relation, this infinite relation between circle and line. Going a little further with this, brain and gut, as well as heart itself, are themselves opposites and have opposite forms of functioning. The brain is spherical and electrical and traffics in binary information and light and knowing and seeing, all of that kind of heady stuff. The gut, to the contrary, is tubular and magnetic and traffics in continuous energetic waveforms and gravity and feeling and intuition. As an oversimplification, the brain can be called the place of our God-allness, and the gut the place of our particular real-world being and relatedness. The brain is, moreover, itself self-opposed in its left-right hemispherical structure, each hemisphere having opposing functions. And the gut is likewise self-opposed in its in-out, me, not me structure. And on do these oppositions go the more one looks into this subject. If you take this oppositional structure and view it through the lens of the chakras, the typical view of the chakras is basically a linear view, which is that you have low to high and the goal is to go up in a straight line. Here I am adding line to circle, where brain, this function that can be called brain within the human energetic system, is the upper three chakras, gut is the lower three, and the heart is the resolution point of the brain-gut open circuit, open system opposition. This is an oppositional or polarity view, or you could say a nonlinear view, a circle line view of the chakras, and can be imaged very basically like this, which is, of course, but a linear version of an infinite eight. A more cosmic version of which might look like this. The co-appearance and co-functioning of the upper and lower triangles, or circles, as it were, of the upper and lower chakras can be seen in the Star of David, with a nod here to Judaism and Israel, with the heart in the center, of course, which we can view also circularly, take the lines out, or toroidally, with a nod to Nassim Haramein, like this. Or in human form, like this. That's a chakra system I can get with. In this nonlinear polarity view, you can see the foundations of sacred geometry, which in the images I just presented can be can use lines in a, let's say, a linear format, or they can use curves and circles in a circular format. And here we begin to see what role sacred geometry plays in a description of the human system. The key to sacred geometry, like the key to the human system itself, the foundation at the bottom of the rabbit hole, is polarity, duality, negativity. Okay, so you have followed me to this point of describing the polar structure of human and all reality as I assert it. Let's ask, so what? I mean, what is the practical import of this view? From my research, I have formed the opinion that the human constitution is unique, and that it represents an evolutionary completion in this universe. What I am in essence saying, and this is my functional definition of scalar, is that when you vibrate as the oppositional reality you are, which is to vibrate as the way the universe and reality fundamentally are, if you do that without moving a Planck length off that balance, if you self-resonate in this fundamental way, which is what Tesla meant by resonance, you have brought the God function of creativity down into created matter and have completed the creator-created polarity in the real. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the creative potential of scalar vibration, and here I mean just merely electromagnetically, and which is a creative destructive potential, because destruction always co-appears with creation, which we can just put this way, that every time the now moves into the new now, that which is old is destroyed in that sense. So newness and destruction are one thing. For those unfamiliar with the creative destructive potential of scalar, let me give a few images of what I consider to be scalar activity on our planet. That is a volcano. You might ask where the electricity is coming from. But in any event, when I look at a volcano, I do not see dust created by some form of kinetic explosion. That just does not make sense to me. What I see is a decomposition of matter itself. This is a NASA image of a volcano. You can see that so-called dust is trailing many, many miles. And in this particular image, that dust is some 60,000 feet above sea level. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I've created dust, it doesn't just keep floating up, particularly 60,000 feet. There's another image of the same volcano. Here's an image. I wonder what that is. I think that dustification event took place in 2001. Volcano. 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 So by destruction, I mean the destructuring of what material appearance is. This destructuring, in what I am describing here as scalar, is by way of vibration into the frame of what matter exists as. Vibrating the frame and not only the content. And recall I previously said that Tesla's genius was that he stumbled upon access to the frame. This gives access to creative destructive potential. And I think it is this that gives some context why ETs are so interested in our planet. And why, if we are to believe the many reports on this matter, that they are so genetically interested in our Constitution. Here is my opinion, for both you and for those ETs, if they have not yet heard it. It is because on planet Earth, in this excruciatingly densified reality, we have taken self-identity, which is the fundamental locus of being reference itself. We have taken self-identity down from the group into the individual. In other words, we have, by this move, compressed universal power, which is creative destructive power, into the individual, him or herself. We are, in other words, incarnating that which is the power of the all and the everything into that which is the all's opposite, the particular little self. This is the essence of the Christian message as I see it, the completion, you might say, or the attainment of polarity in the evolution of individual form in this earthly constitution. I find the essence of this development spoken of in the Gospel of Thomas, where in verse 22, Jesus is said to say, and if you just go down a little there, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one, so that the male will not be male, nor the female female, and when you fashion eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in the place of a foot, and likeness in the place of likeness, you will enter the kingdom. This polar completion, or full manifestation of this universal, all-pervading yin-yang, is prefigured in the Bible's book of Genesis, verse 3, where the snake, which represents the reptilian, that is, the reptilian individualized gut element, because a snake is just a tiny little brain with a big intestine that it drags behind itself. This gut element, which the reptilian snake represents, this feminine domain of feeling and relation, so individually crucial for attaining this powerful polar structure. The story of that reptilian element, that individualizing element, goes like this. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "Well, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "Well, you will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman. "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Or knowing polarity itself, which is knowing absolute unity. Once good is no longer viewed as just simply good, but is absolutely relativized to its opposite, evil, where good is accordingly seen as the progenitor and co-appearance of what is called evil, in that fundamental duality good-evil, then good is not good, to quote Rabbi Mendel, or the Gospel of Thomas, and evil is not evil. and therefore is no longer evil considered outside unity, having no purpose. Whereupon something else entirely can then be set free to happen and be. It is here I arrive at my final point in this presentation. And if we have some time, we'll allow some questions at the end. I have to this point said the following. First point, the fundamental vibration of reality is the vibration of duality itself. This vibration, point 2, is creative. Point 3, the human architecture is designed to vibrate duality at the individual level, so represents an advance in creaturehood by completing the circle of creator and creature by vesting full creative potential in the individual person. Fair enough, I guess, hey? The question then arises, well, how does one activate this creativity latent in our structure? The answer to me is simple. You must simply be everything without preference. Everything being quite simply that which you are, and in being everything, you will vibrate everything, which is to say, you will vibrate the dualities of reality simultaneously, without diminishment, and without working one against the other, light against dark, high against low, this against that, or good against evil. The secret here is that to vibrate everything, you have to love everything. Let's put it this way. If there exists a vibration which is any configuration of your experience, or any configuration of your energy or your awareness, if there is any vibration whatsoever that you do not love, your unlovingness will function as a rejection of that which is accordingly rejected. It will form a rejection place in and as your awareness and your energy, unbalancing the whole. Resonance will be lost, and with that, your creative power all out the window in an instant of the collapse of polarity itself. So in polarity terms, unlovingness manifests as a structure of working against oneself. Remember, because all opposites are identical, if, for example, you reject dark in preference to light, you are in the same act of rejecting dark, rejecting light, which is to work against that which you claim to be working for, necessarily. This is a state of contradiction, which is, of course, but a configuration of polarity, but it is of a type of configuration that generates destruction while claiming creation. This version of a contradictory state, which is different from the paradoxical, self-sustaining, over-unity state of polarity, this version of contradiction is self-defeating by its nature. The solution is simply to solve your contradictions. This was Nisargadatta's wonderful insight. Nisargadatta was that Indian shopkeeper. And I like what he says in the second paragraph, that what is supremely important is to be free from contradictions. The goal and the way must not be on different levels. Life and light, you might say, frame and content, must not quarrel. Behavior must not betray belief. Call it honesty, integrity, wholeness, Tenacity of purpose and honesty in pursuit will bring you to your goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was absolutely spectacular. I know my mind was blown in a dualistic way.
We just run this just for a
Running
second
a video?
here,
Oh,
yeah.
sure, no problem.
This is a video from Nassim Haramein. Thank you. Okay, that's good. So I understand there's no time for questions. I will be hanging out during the day and watching some other presentations and whatnot. If there are some opportunities, we can perhaps just gather in a corner or something. And if you have questions, you can ask.
And we could also, in the future, possibly organize like a Q&A with Tom.
Yeah,
on
no
like
problem.
a live format, like on Skype or something.
We could do a live format on
because I got a lot of
internet.
questions.
Yeah, there's obviously that this is, what I presented was a very, and I had to use a lot of notes because the language had to be right. It's a very compressed understanding of the scope of what I have been investigating through the last at least 20 years. And so it will necessarily generate a large number of questions that we could, work towards some format where people could, because that's when it gets fun, is when if something twigs you, then you get to ask, okay, what does this mean? And kind of carry on with that. That's very meaningful. And the presentation that I gave for its own part can be just used as a bit of a reference in that sense.
Absolutely. Be honored to do that. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you.